Hello, welcome to my videocast, Foresight with Evelyn Morales. Today, I have with me a very special and talented guest, former astronaut Benjamin Alvin Drew. He's a United States Air Force officer and former astronaut. He was selected for two space flights, one in 2007 to the space station, and the second one in 2011 also to the space station. He flew on the Space Shuttle Discovery for the last time. Uh, Al also performed two incredible spacewalks, who I remember very vividly because I helped train him with using the virtual reality technology. Al also has two degrees, no, actually a degree, a bachelor's of science in physics and aeronautic engineering from the United States Air Force Academy. He also has a master's degree in airspace from the Embry-Riddle Aeronautic University, and he also has a master's degree in political science from the Air War College. Al is also from DC. He works now at NASA headquarters in the administration area. I also want to mention that Al gave me actually, presented to me my Flight Safety Award, well known as the Snoopy Award, given by the astronaut office to employees for their contributions. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to welcome you to my program to talk about the Space Force and the impact that that's going to have in the next generation of space professionals. So welcome, Al. Thank you for being here with me.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Ellen, and it's good to be here and good to be talking with you again.
Well, thank you. And so I have several questions and to converse with you, to talk to you today about the Space Force branch and how does that work with the rest of the forces within the military. Can you just tell me about that?
Okay, so it's good to start off with a little bit of Space Force's history. As long as there's been, since the early 60s, late 50s, there's always been a military activity in space. As long as it's been an Air Force, we've had rockets launching out of New Mexico and other places. And by about 1982, there was enough of a community of space activity and budget that they decided it was big enough to create an Air Force Space Command, which is the next biggest organization below the level of like an Army or an Air Force. These are called major commands. And that was out in Colorado Springs. And even then, they knew that at some point that activity would grow big enough that it would become its own separate service, the way the Air Force became a separate service from the Army once it got big enough. And so about 2 years ago, everybody decided it was big enough to become its own service. So the president petitioned Congress to stand up an Air Force, a Space Force that was separate from the Air Force. And its sole job was to go and be able to defend our American interests in space.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we have now total of how many branches of the military? I mean, how many forces do we have? Six total?
Six total. Let's see if I can get them all right now. It'll be the Navy and the Army, of course. You have the Marine Corps and the Air Force, and you have the Coast Guard, which is sometimes with us, but doesn't work in the Department of Defense except in wartime. And then last and certainly not least, the Space Force.
Exactly. Wonderful. Okay, that's great. So, why the need? Because, okay, so what I understand, right, is that defense and military has always influenced the development of technology, new technologies. That has been the norm, right? I mean, what we knew. But in the last probably 15, 20 years, I have seen, and me in my position, see that technology has really been uh, uh, accelerating and improving very dramatically because of the Internet of Things. Communication is faster. We have satellites. We have, things are moving and information is moving faster. So, has technology influenced the rapidly development of technology influenced the now forming of this force?
I would say yes. It's one of those cases where even 20 years ago, people in the military were predicting that they would no longer lead the technology development, but it would go the other way. Industry had caught up with the military and the government and would soon be well past them. And that was 20 years ago, and those predictions were true. So the need for a space force came from its own successes. Now, we had this Air Force Space Command, and one of the first things they put up in space was the global positioning system, GPS. They also had telecommunication systems out there and all other means out there. But the main thing was GPS. And of course, we all depend on that to this very day. You couldn't turn on Google Maps now and use it without a GPS up there. And you've used that with great effect. And of course, GPS wasn't designed to give us Google Maps. It was designed for us to be able to navigate and put weapons on targets very accurately. And starting with the Gulf War back in 91, we demonstrated that with great success. So suddenly, if you're an enemy, one, you want to have your own GPS, which a lot of these other countries have built since they watched the success we had. You also want to deny the U.S. its ability to use its GPS to precision target weapons. And that was where we've watched our other nations out there build things to jam or even blow up our satellites out there in orbit that they don't want us to be able to use in times of war. In order to protect those, you need a robust defense, and that has caused the Space Force to have to build up from its humble beginnings.
Right. Yeah, and like you said, I mean, all the different air forces. I mean, Army has its own, space support
Yes.
in cadre. I mean, group, and that supports the missions with the space communications. So now it's all kind of gonna be kind of integrated through the Space Force. It is.
Yes. So what you see is a lot of the Army and Navy groups will take a lot of their members and donate them to the Space Force as it grows. The Air Force, of course, being the obvious first donor. But each of the services uses space for its own purposes. The Army, like the Navy, primarily want to use space for communications, and they don't necessarily need to have that space force. They want somebody out there in the field who can set up an antenna, connect up to their radios, and bring them the information and data that they need. And those people will remain in their respective services, the Navy, the Army, Marine Corps. But those who are simply space professionals, people who are launching satellites and operating them to make sure that that information gets out to those users in the field, will all likely migrate over to the Space Force.
Wonderful. So this brings me to exactly to my next question is about the skills. What are going to be, because this is so important for us to develop that next workforce, right? The skills necessary to support all this as we go into the future. So what can you tell me are those skills necessary from the technical to the bachelor's and master's? I mean, what will be that range of skills that we have to consider moving into this, supporting this endeavor now?
So one of the main differences between warriors of old and these 21st century warriors is that you don't accompany your weapons onto the battlefield. If you're an Army soldier, you would take your sword or your knife or your machine gun out there to the battlefield with you. As people are seeing now with our drones, with our remotely piloted vehicles, you may be sitting in a Connex somewhere north of Las Vegas and fighting an air war over Afghanistan. And so what you're seeing are data on screens. And so you need to be able to quickly look at that data, assimilate the data that you're seeing in pictures and go, here's what's going on around me. And now I need to make a very critical decision. And so you need to have those type of analytical skills to be able to understand that. So if you're operating a satellite in space, you should know orbital mechanics. You need to know if your satellite's in the wrong orbit. There's more to it than that. You also need to know, is your electrical bus operating correctly? Are your solar arrays pointed correctly towards the sun? Lots of other information out there that means you have to be able to look at a lot of technical information, fuse that all in your head, and turn that into what they call an operating picture, a sense of what's going on. It's called situation awareness. So you can take the next step. Okay, my radio stopped working because somebody's jamming me, or this is going on because somebody's lasing me, or this thing has just failed because it's an old circuit and it's tired and it died. And so I
This
need to
sounds like
know.
a game training. This sounds
Yes,
like right,
it's
and we
exactly
talk
that.
a lot about
Yes.
VR game training or
Oh, yes.
so wow, this, I mean, now as you're talking, I can see a bigger picture here because we also always are inclining to these engineering fields that are very kind of specific and traditional, but now you're combining it with this gaming technology and that you need to know about logistics and the big picture. Um,
Yes.
Fascinating. Tell me more about
So
the.
it's not just the technical pieces of it. There is still this warfighting aspect of it. As we noticed with our, we first started flying these drones. They were just to look at the battlefield, and if they saw bad guys, they would radio to a fighter jet that would go and attack them. And what they found out quickly was that the amount of time it would take to bring in a jet from somewhere else, the enemy might get away. So they started putting weapons on these remote vehicles. And now, so you're not just sitting there, looking at data and going, here's where the person is. You might be called on to fire a weapon. And now you want to be sure that you're not firing at somebody who's friendly or somebody who's innocent, but that you're acting. So there's this big part where you have to make very, very tough decisions very, very soon. If you don't fire the weapon, they might come up and kill your friendly troops. And if you fired in the wrong situation, you have all these other consequences. So there's a lot of stress. And I know when I was on the battlefield, when I got done with my combat missions, I was still amongst my other buddies who were sitting out there forward deployed in a combat zone. Well, and I had a lot of stress to blow off. They understood that. But this case, you may be making these critical life or death decisions, and then you go get in rush hour traffic and drive back to your family and children, and now you have to somehow set all that stress aside so you don't bring that into your house. So it's a very different game, but you have to take all the combat skills and the technical skills and put them all together. And it's going to make for a very unique population of people out there working those missions.
And this now that you're talking, it brings me also to this important part of the psychology of it, and how you're gonna have to, have this training also in how to, what is it, uh, uh, what is it, digest everything that you're gonna be doing so quickly, right, with this new warfare, and then switching back to a normal life, or what you call, so that digestion of that information, gonna have to be, it has to be pretty quick. So it brings me about really being trained in psychology. I mean, really have that, that this is very interesting, because I see a more holistic approach into engineering of what we know, into this. And obviously the gamification of training and plays a big part, because I guess for young people, you can figure out quickly maybe those that might be better suited for this type of endeavors, and at a younger age, right?
Yeah.
Um, and,
And this
and
is where the importance of having a very good training environment comes in. You talked about VR. If you can make an extremely immersive and realistic environment in which people are making those decisions, you may find out very quickly you don't like doing that, or you do, and this will help you get better so that when you are in a real situation, it all seems familiar to you. And if you don't mind me digressing a little bit, when I did my very first spacewalk, one of my very concerns was, is this going to freak me out the first time I'm looking 250 miles straight down at the Earth? And when I went out the door, I was shocked to figure out that my body didn't react at all. There was no big adrenaline spike. In fact, the people watching my heart rate said it actually went down when I went out the door into space. And I like, why did I do that? Well, it was because I had a bunch of VR engineers at Johnson Space Center who clearly had way too much time on their hand. They had these very hyper-realistic virtual reality environments that I was training in. And what I didn't realize at the time was that it was giving me a sense of what the environment was like. So when I went out there, my body just said, we've been here, we've got the t-shirt, when I clearly had never been in space before. Part of my subconscious felt that I had. And so that's where you bring that, if you can do that in terms of a combat situation, boy, you can help a lot of people come home alive from the battlefield.
right, right. That's fantastic. We heard that a lot, right? It looks just like the VR lab, like we said.
Yes.
But that's what VR does. I mean, it really transports you to that area, that place, that location that you couldn't replicate any other way. And just the familiarization of that, at any space, in any area, it gives you a head. You put you ahead of anything else.
Oh
So
yeah.
that's wonderful. Well, to hear that, obviously, but I know
Yeah.
who those engineers were. It's wonderful. So I see engineering, I see positioning system people, actually in the school now, right? I see all these different fields being utilized for the Space Force, and also technology in the gamification of this training is going to be pretty significant. But I'm sure that you're going to also, the Space Force will need people in business or contracting and all these other areas that, many professionals also like to pursue. So I guess you will need all that as well. So
Absolutely.
what is the difference now? Because I know people say, well, you're a NASA, you're Air Force. What is the difference between being a NASA, right, working for NASA, and working for the Space Force, for example?
Okay. So yeah, that's something I deal with every day because I am the liaison between NASA and the Air Force. The Air Force and the services prepare to fight our nation's wars. Their job is to keep our nation secure, and that's always their focus. They're not going out to Mars just to see what Mars is like. They're out at Mars. If they're out at Mars, they're there to protect U.S. interests on Mars. Whereas NASA was founded specifically for the peaceful exploration of space in 1958. In fact, President Eisenhower was concerned that space was becoming overly militarized, and they wanted another venue with which to go into space and develop technology that wasn't focused on things like ballistic missiles or blowing each other up. There was so much more to do in space than that, and so that's why the NACA, the predecessor to NASA, was reformulated as NASA to go out and do those particular things. Now, it turns out we're in a lot of the same places, and you need a lot of the same hardware. So NASA hardware looks a lot like Space Force hardware. And a lot of the NASA places we operate are in the same places too. So it's easy to confuse the two, but we're there for very different purposes.
Wow, wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad that you clarify that, being in both sides, right? At some
Yes.
Now, have you been looking at the new SpaceX and the new commercialization of space? What do you think about that? And how
So
do
we,
you
we
see the future of that?
so we were talking a while back about industry catching up with the government and sometimes passing them. And this is a case in point. I remember, 7, 8 years ago, SpaceX proposing to the government that they wanted to fly their boosters back to land at Canaveral. And everybody thought that was the craziest thing they'd ever heard of. They're like, what if this thing goes off? You could hit Jacksonville, you could hit Disneyland. And now they're talking about doing the exact same things that SpaceX has demonstrated. So there's a case where you have a very innovative company pushing the frontiers. They're putting up large constellations of satellites, sometimes hundreds at a time, to give us Wi-Fi all over the planet. Imagine having 5G in the deepest, darkest canyons of any mountain range,
Amazing.
because there's 20 satellites overhead all the time that can relay that information to you. They're pushing all these things. And so it's good to see folks out there, not with SpaceX, but Blue Origin and Rocket Labs and lots of other these startup companies out there, pushing the boundaries of technology and capabilities of what we can do. And we've had the good sense to go, well, if you're going to do it, we'll tag along with you. We'll buy your products and we'll use your services.
Well, this is so exciting for the future, right? This is my program, Foresight. So,
Yes.
future and the next generation of emerging professionals in this area is going to be just amazing. And it's just amazing to see the development. And for me, being at NASA for so many years and now in education and seeing what the future can bring is amazing. So I'm sure you also see that and are excited about the future as me. So, well, this is, has been fantastic, Al. Thank you for really, sharing this information with us. And, I'm glad that you have accepted. Do you have something to say to my audience?
Yes, I enjoyed it. Let's do this again sometime.
Well, thank you so much. I'll appreciate taking the time, and I'll definitely see you soon.
All
So
right.
thank you
See you then.
again.
All right.